morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Merritt, Director of Community Programs at the Glasgow School of Continuing Studies, and it is my great honor to welcome you all to Rice and to the Glasgow School. Thank you all for being here. How many of you are visiting the Glasgow School for the first time today? Wow, welcome. We're glad to have you. And how many of you have taken a class with us before or have been here for an event? That's great. Welcome back to all of you. Well, I would like to start out this morning with two quotes that I hope will resonate with you and set the tone for the day. The first is from sociologist Parker Palmer, who said, "Fall madly in love with life. Clinging to what you already know and do well is the path to an unlived life. So cultivate beginner's mind. Walk straight into your not knowing and take the risk of failing and falling again and again, then getting up again and again to learn. That's the path to a life lived large in service of love, truth, and justice." The second quote I have for you is, "Never perhaps have any of us needed as much as we do today to use all the curiosity we have, needed to seek new knowledge, needed to realize that no knowledge is terminal. For almost everything in our world is new, startlingly new. None of us can afford to stop learning or to check our curiosity about new things." Does anyone know who wrote that? That was Eleanor Roosevelt in 1960. And it's even more true today. We live in an age of exponential change where skill sets can become outdated in 18 months or less. And with the rise of all sorts of technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, there's a lot of concern about what the future holds for humans in terms of work, life, and well-being. And in a recent report on the future of skills, there were two recommendations for people who wanted to thrive throughout their lives. The first, develop your uniquely human capacities, things like creativity and the ability to connect deeply with others. The second, commit to lifelong learning. And in short, lifelong learning is not a luxury. It's an attribute, a skill, and attitude that all of us need to thrive in a world in flux. The great thing about this audience is you all already know that. The fact that you're here today to spend an entire Saturday immersed in the best learning that Houston and Rice have to offer is a testament to your commitment to that, and we're delighted to have you here. So I hope that you will think of the Glasgow School as your home for lifelong learning at Rice, where you can have experiences like Classroom Connect year-round. This is a place where we invite you to be the fullest version of yourself, to set aside the roles that define you elsewhere in life, and explore whatever intrigues you. And to do so in the company of some truly exceptional classmates and faculty, many of whom you'll be hearing from and interacting with today. I'd like to tell you just a tiny bit about the Glasgow School before we welcome our illustrious speaker this morning. Our department offers more than 90 Learning for the Love of Learning courses each year, and they span every discipline at Rice, from the future of work, democracy and disagreement, Tibetan meditation, to the psychology of happiness. And those classes are just a portion of what's offered at the Glasgow School, which has been serving the community for more than 50 years and has more than 17,000 enrollments a year. We also have programs in professional development, foreign languages, English as a second language, philanthropy and nonprofit leadership, K-12 leadership, readiness, early literacy, and 2 master's degree programs, one in teaching and one in liberal studies. And we offer more than 60 classes online a year. Right now, we are busily preparing our 2018 fall classes, and I can only hint at some of those offerings, but I can tell you that we will be exploring the current political landscape, religion and public life, how to put mindfulness into practice, Houston's resilience in the face of extreme weather, and perhaps most appropriate for this morning, a class on the role of women in the space program. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our print and electronic catalogs. Our new catalog will be coming out in mid-July, and you're welcome to sign up for our mailing list if you're not already on it at glasgow.rice.edu. I hope you have a wonderful day today. I hope that we school very soon, and I encourage you to stay curious. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning. My name is Dan Stipe, and I serve as the Associate Director of Alumni Programs in the Office of Alumni Relations. And it's my distinct honor to welcome all of you here today to join us for Classroom Connect. Our first speaker is someone we are so pleased, proud, and honored to be joining us this morning. She is a Rice alum herself, and Dr. Peggy Whitson has participated in 4 spacewalks, bringing her total to 10. With a total of 665 days in space, Dr. Whitson holds the U.S. record, placing 8th on the all-time space endurance list. The Iowa native also completed 2 6-month tours of duty aboard the station for Expedition 5 in 2002, and as the station commander for Expedition 16 in 2008, where she accumulated 377 days in space between the 2 missions, the most for any U.S. woman at the time of her return to Earth. And just recently, this week, Dr. Peggy Whitson was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential individuals. And so with these accolades, it is our great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Peggy Whitson.
Well, it's great to get an opportunity to come back to Rice and chat with you folks. I thought I'd tell a little bit of my story, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions so I can talk to you guys about what you would like to hear most specifically about. I'm from Iowa, as he mentioned, and grew up on a farm in very rural Iowa. There were a lot more pigs and cattle around than there were people. The closest little town had 32 people in it when I was growing up. We did all the things Iowa kids do, playing in the snow, water skiing, raising cattle. But it is on, yeah. But my dream, my goal was to become an astronaut. And that actually started when I was 9 years old. The first men walked on the moon, and I thought, wow, cool job. I'd like to do that too. Of course, when you're 9, you want to be lots of things. And I don't really think it became a goal for me until I graduated from high school. And that was the year they picked the first female astronauts, Sally Ride among them. But also Shannon Lucid, who is a biochemist. And I was interested in biology and thought, well, hey, maybe I could actually become an astronaut. So it was great having a role model up there to inspire me and drive me to try to be an astronaut. Luckily, I think, I had no idea how hard it would be to become an astronaut or what the chances and odds were against it. Even after I finished from Rice University, I immediately started working at NASA as a biochemist. It took 10 years of applying before I was lucky enough to be selected as an astronaut. So. A lot of rejections, but I hung in there and eventually made it. I did 3 space flights. The first space flight was actually on a shuttle, launched and landed on a shuttle, but lived on board the International Space Station. And actually, one of the things, just a historical thing, just as a reminder, the space station's been up there and had a human presence for 18 years now. And so of that 18 years, I did almost two years of that U.S. presence on board the space station. It was an incredible experience. Many of my 2 early missions had a lot more assembly of the actual space station, and this mission actually focused a lot more on the science that we're doing up there. So I wanted to give you a flavor of all parts of that. And my second and third flights, I launched on a Soyuz, a Russian capsule. That was after the Columbia accident, while we stood down for almost 2 years to re-examine the shuttles and figure out what our problem was. We started launching our crews on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. And it's a very reliable spacecraft, been flying almost the same spacecraft for the 50-some years. So. It's been modified somewhat over the years. But anyway, this was the night before our launch. The supermoon was there, and they captured a neat shot of it. And let's go to here. The actual launch itself on a Soyuz rocket is a little bit, I would call it kinder and gentler than a shuttle, because the shuttle has a lot more vibrations because of the solid rocket boosters. This is all liquid fueled, kerosene fueled, so it's a little smoother ride. You do have the staging effects that you know, kind of jolt you as one engine shuts down. That's me in there. And this is as we approach the International Space Station. It's a football field size assembly out there in space that we constructed at 17,500 miles an hour. And here's the docking, being welcomed on board the space station by Shane Kimbrough, who was commander at the time. And let's keep going. Best thing about being in space is being in space. Zero gravity. Zero gravity is amazing. You live your whole life, everything is based on gravity, and you don't realize how much of your life is based on gravity. So much so that when you drop something, you look down to find it. And in space, that's not the case. You actually, when you lose something, your brain is telling you to look down, you know, away from your head, and it's not necessarily there. I always tell the new guys when they arrive, just turn 90 degrees or 180 degrees, and you'll find it. You know, it'll be floating there. You just won't. Your brain doesn't expect to see it there, and so you kind of have to trick it into actually seeing things. But zero gravity provides a great opportunity to do a lot of research too. And in zero gravity, you can do experiments on the ceiling, the walls, the floor, because they're all pretty much the same in zero gravity. So you can see me working in a portable glove box over here that's on the ceiling. This is one of the more elaborate glove boxes that actually pulls out of the side of the rack, and then you can see me working on the floor here. So, you know, you work in every orientation, you use all the space, so you actually are very efficient at, you know, making use of the space because you can in zero gravity. So this rack, we have facilities, actually, let me go back just a little bit. So some of our facilities are very small and confined, and you can change the experiments in and out each time we have a cargo vehicle arrive. We get to, you know, we can swap out experiments, send some home, and then put in new experiments. And so the investigators will design it based on the interfaces that the racks have. So the racks provide power and data, video, and then we can ship the data down to them either electronically or if they have to have samples in down mass. But some of the facilities we have actually take up a whole side, what we call a whole rack. And these facilities are huge, and they offer generic capabilities. So we have, for instance, a combustion chamber. We have a life sciences microscope that does real-time measurements of things that are happening, whether it's protein crystallizations or plant growth. But what's neat is that you can move around this 1,200-pound mass pretty easily because it doesn't weigh anything. It just has mass. So you just move it very slowly, and it's quite capable to move it. Interestingly, though, you know, you have to use your toes. You're pulling against a handrail. And after a couple months, the calluses on the bottoms of your feet actually go away because you don't need calluses on the bottoms of your feet, but you end up with little calluses on the tops of your toes. Well, one of the real elaborate experiments that we did that involved a lot of different investigations is trying to understand what some changes that we're seeing in the eyes. Sometimes we have permanent vision changes from being in space, and we're trying to understand that. So this was, you know, just to kind of illustrate how elaborate we go to measure all different things. You get suited up in all these things. We do OCTs, ultrasounds, tonometry. This is one specifically looking at the eyes to visualize that. So. We also have done some really interesting DNA sequencing on board. We first did our sequencing the year before last now, Kate Rubens did the first DNA sequencing on board just using a commercial apparatus. And it actually worked sometimes with fluids in zero gravity. Air fluid mixtures don't work well. The hardware doesn't work well. And this was a commercial off-the-shelf piece of hardware that actually worked great because it had really fine microtubules that allowed it to work. And during our flight, we actually did the first sequencing. So I did a microbial swab of one of the walls and cultured the bacteria, and then took a sample of that and sequenced it to do our first identification of a bacteria in space. And that's actually important for us for future exploration missions, because right now we take all those samples back to the ground and analyze them here on the ground. And obviously if we're going on a 1 year, 2 or 3 year mission to Mars, for instance, we won't be able to do that. So we actually have to have the capability of identifying microbes. And also it has obvious benefits if we find some forms of life that we can look at. That would be interesting. We do tons of experiments on the human body. So we have saliva samples, blood samples, urine samples, and they all have to be frozen in these -80 freezers. They're huge. We have like 4 chambers in one set, and then you have 4 of these chambers down below here, and then we have 3 racks of these chambers. And new investigations that come up, and they might be frozen, and then we pull them out and initiate the scientific experiment, and then when we finish, we freeze it back up to take back to the ground for the investigators. So there's a lot of different types of scientific research going on board. One of the more interesting ones, this was a spheres experiment. It's these little balls have carbon dioxide in them to propel them, and it's looking at software programs and programming for how to have satellites move around in space in zero gravity. And this particular one was a contest for high school and college students from all over the world, and they were playing these games, trying to, against 2 different teams, basically fighting against trying to make the scores using their software programs for controlling these spheres on orbit, which I think is just really very cool. MIT sponsors that contest. And we also did a lot of cell cultures on this flight, which I think is actually really cool. We're really demonstrating new things that we can do on board the space station. For instance, we cultured progenitor stem cells of different types to see if you could replicate them better in zero gravity. We looked at bone cells. Obviously, in space, when you don't have gravity pulling on you, we actually lose bone mass at a pretty high rate if we don't do something about it. So we tested a lot of different drugs and exercise protocols as well. But if you had osteoporosis, you would lose 1% of your bone mass in a year, approximately. And on orbit, we lose 1% a month if we don't do something about it. So it's a very accelerated bone loss if we aren't, very proactively going after it. But these cell culture experiments, we had microscopes set up, looking at different imagings. I have a few slides of some of those experiments that we did a little bit later on. During my mission, this last mission, I think we had 5 cargo vehicles showed up during that expedition. So cargo vehicles are coming to the space station all the time. Some of those are commercially provided, like SpaceX is providing cargo, and Cygnus, Orbital ATK, are providing cargo to the International Space Station. The European Space Agency has a cargo vehicle. The Japanese Space Agency has a cargo vehicle. That's what this one is. It's a Japanese one. And then the Russians have a cargo vehicle as well. And a lot of them come up and they'll hover just away from the station. So this is, you have to have very good control of your vehicles to bring them up and hover them right next to the station. And then we use this 17-meter Canadian robotic arm to go out and grab the vehicle. We bring it on to the station and attach it, and it's on the other end, but it's about this size on the other end that has a 16-volt connection that we attach it to the station at a port. And then once we leak check it all, then we open up the hatches and we can go in and pull out all the hardware. Here's just a time lapse of us. We're looking out the cupola window, and this is what we would see running the robotic arm. And then you can see this is a SpaceX vehicle, and that's where the 16-volt system connects up. We also did a number of spacewalks. I've done a total of 10. I did 4 on this last mission. Some of the spacewalks we do are refurbishing. We have new batteries for the external solar arrays. Each of the solar arrays has a 239-foot long wing that collects power, and then that power gets stored in batteries for when we're in the eclipse. And so we use the power from those batteries all the time. And we were upgrading the batteries in one EVA. In another EVA on this one, we were replacing a power supply for an experiment that on this big pallet that was located outside. And so there's a big power supply we were pulling off, a tall one, like almost as big as me. And everything that we do in space has to be tethered. So we have all these tools and tethers that have to hold our tools. We have these, what we call this pistol grip tool. We have common bolts that we try and have all the hardware have, so we have very few different sockets that we need to actually get things done, and simplifies our work. But it's a little bit awkward to work in. It's a pretty large spacesuit. Here's my tether to the station here, you can see. You can see the pistol grip tool. You can see some more tethers. So tethers is kind of the key. These are radiators. This is part of that football field truss, and here is me. So, and one of the really cool parts about working at NASA is actually the teamwork that's involved. It really is special, but not just the team on board the space station. This is our Expedition 51 team when I was the commander. We had Oleg and Fyodor from Russia, Thomas from France, and Jack, an Air Force pilot from the U.S., as well as myself. And then on orbit, I mentioned the exercise.
We have 3 different exercise devices here, and I'm going to talk about one of them. Of course, it's zero gravity. We can't lift weights, so we have what's called a resistance.
Yeah, I'm going to talk over it myself here. So, but the resistive exercise device is here, and we have to work against resistance because you can't lift weights in space. So we have to use resistance. But the thing when you're lifting against a resistance, it can cause a lot of vibrations, which could damage science data and hardware itself. So you can see the whole thing is suspended and floating, through a system that allows us to do very heavy weights on orbit with this machine that we can reconfigure and do lots of different things with. This is just to show you. The other exercises that we have a treadmill. Of course, if you think about zero gravity with a treadmill, you have to have a harness that holds you down and pulls you down and makes you feel like you have weight again, which kind of sucks. But you use a harness to pull you down to run, and then on the bicycle, it's pretty easy. You're floating, but you can still get the same kind of a workout on a device that's got a special isolation system to it. So I'm gonna keep going here. When you're in space for long periods of time, you have to you have holidays, and at Christmas time, I was trying to get the guys excited about Christmas time. So we had a cookie cookie decorating contest. And of course, I made it a contest so that the guys would be more interested. And you can see they took it very seriously, you know. Ended up, Oleg won. I had a friend of mine who does cake decorating. She's a flight director, but she does cake decorating on the ground, and had made her the judge. And Oleg won with creative use of color. He didn't have any yellow, so he used a little mustard. This, we also have a little fun with food. I had Jell-O made up in pouches so that we could have it in zero gravity during Christmas as one of our celebrations, a little bit different than normal. And this video I'll show you just because we were taking the picture, 4th of July picture, and I like it because it illustrates, you know, how easy it is to move around in space and all the different kind of poses and stuff that you can do. And I thought it was kind of cute that it illustrates, you know, how it is to move around in space. So finally we got one we liked eventually. And we're actually in front of the airlock. This is a small airlock that we take experiments in and out of to the porch. So, and for entertainment, you know, on the weekends, usually on Friday night, we do dinner and a movie thing. So we have our lounge chairs consisted of, because we don't have chairs, because you don't sit, we would I set up these bungees. I made our bungee chairs. So you put one arm kind of around and wrap a leg around to hold yourself in place. And you had yourself the most comfortable chair in the world, just a little bungee chair. And then we'd have the video on the upper screen there. I like this picture because it also shows, it's a fisheye view, obviously, but it shows, you know, over here we have the European science module, we have the Japanese science module. We have one U.S. We do some science in here, but it's also where our crew sleep stations are here. Each of us has a kind of a phone booth-sized sleep station that we sleep in. Then you go into the U.S. laboratory, and then down beyond there is the Node 1, which has an airlock attached to it, and Node 3, and the MPLM, and the beam. And so there's 15 different modules on board the space station. So when people ask, you know, is it claustrophobic? I'm like, no, you could work all morning in a module and never see anybody else because they'll all be working, you know, everybody would be working in a different place. So and then one time for fun, we get all these cargo. It comes up in these big bags. And Toma's like, oh, I think I could fit in that, almost fit in that bag, it's so big. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could. So they zipped me inside the bag and carried me down to the Russian segment and had Oleg open it up to see what's inside. And he starts unzipping it, I pop out, scare the crap out of me, and it was funny. But one of the most fun things to do in your free time is, of course, look out the window. This cupola window, it has an amazing view. It looks down toward the Earth all the time, and it's amazing. You can see all kinds of things. You can see parts of the structure of station. You know, here's parts of the truss assembly. You have radiators for heat rejection. We have those 239-foot solar array wings. We have the Russian solar array wings here. But the really cool thing is the limb of the Earth during a sunrise, and you can see how thin the atmosphere is relative to the Earth. It gives you a real sense of, you know, we need to protect this place that we're from. Here's just another view with the big robotic arm, the solar arrays, when they're not angled off so that they don't have that orange glow to them. But and then here's the porch, we call it, that's outside the Japanese science module. we can, through that airlock, put experiments out and shoot them off using the arm. We had hurricanes. We had a lot of hurricanes last year. I don't remember which one this is, but Harvey was actually going on when I landed. We also had the eclipse, and this is the view of the eclipse from above, which I think was really cool. And we have some incredible auroras over both the northern and the southern poles. Yeah, let's see if it'll run the time lapse. See. There we go. So it really does feel like the whole thing is moving. You know, the auroras, they're just incredibly beautiful. Hard to describe. But there's amazing, you know, sand dunes off of the water. There's sunrises and sunsets. Normally, sunrises and sunsets are pretty fast because you're going either 17,500 miles an hour toward it or away from it, depending on, you know, sunrise you're going toward it and sunsets you're going away from them. So they don't last very long. But certain times, what they call the beta angle is such that the sun doesn't actually really set, and you get long time periods of where you can have sunsets and actually photograph them from the space station with beautiful views from the ground. You see lots of things that are man-made. Obviously, the straight lines indicate that. This is sand, and you know, this looks like wood grain, I think. The colors in the Caribbean are truly, truly amazing. The Great Barrier Reef here. And here's a time lapse that Jack did of the Milky Way. So there's quite a few stars you can see from space. Pretty amazing to be able to see it. So lots of different experiments that we do on board. This was one, a Japanese robotic ball that was using tiny little fans that would move around. That had a camera on it located right between its little eyes, so it could look around and be ground controlled. So they were testing that out. They need bigger fans because it would get caught in the ventilation system sometimes and pushed around. We did some vegetable growth. On my first flight, I grew soybeans, which was kind of cool because my dad was growing soybeans on the ground while I was growing soybeans in space. But this flight, the cool thing about our vegetable experiments is that every other harvest they let us eat. So that was kind of a big deal to get approval that we could actually eat some of this stuff. And so it would be special. We would, you know, I would make up some special concoction. You know, we'd have some canned lobster, tuna fish or whatever, and I could make up something and put on our fresh vegetables, which was nice. After several months, you don't get a lot of that fresh stuff. We did a number of experiments that were looking at muscle, trying to understand the effects on muscle and the exercise that we're doing. This is the gene sequencing experiment that I talked a little bit about earlier. We did a bunch of different, this one was cardiac stem cells, but I mentioned bone cells and progenitor stem cells. So a lot of cell culture work was done during this expedition, which is neat. Actually, one of the investigations was looking at lung cancer cells. They grow more like they do in the human body in space. So they grow them up there. And then we had a antibody-drug combination that recognized the lung cancer cells and attacked them. And it was subjectively it was working because I could see it under the microscope. It was killing the cancer cells. And Jack, he's a fighter pilot, so he called them cancer-seeking missiles, which I thought was kind of cute. But we did all kinds of really interesting research, and I think that the more and more that you know, people can understand what new things we can get by using that lack of gravity, as a variable will really, I think, expand commercialization for science in space. So I think that will be really cool. A really interesting experiment, so on Earth, a flame burns like this. In space, a flame burns a little bit differently. One of the things, and when they shoot the flames out in a ball and float the ball of fuel, it'll burn a specific way. But one of the interesting things they found is that once it burns out, then it actually will reignite with what's called cool flames. And they had just put on some special cameras so they could actually visualize this even better. Because obviously we can't see that kind of reignition on the ground. The other forces have a much bigger effect. And in the lack of gravity, they can actually see that. And that can help us understand fuel efficiency, fuel burns here on Earth, even potentially. But obviously, it's important for us for future exploration missions to understand characteristics of burning for rocket engines, or if you had, in the case of a fire, understanding how it's necessary that we might need to put them out. Lots of our research actually has impacts here on the Earth. One of the studies that they did actually determined that vitamin D levels, the USDA vitamin D levels, were too low. And now we've increased the vitamin D levels required here in our population because of the research that we had done on board looking at bone loss. We have a lot of experiments that are also external, mounted outside on the truss, that football field length truss. This one was MAXI, and they were looking at visualizing black holes. But one of my favorite ones, and I don't have a slide for it, was an experiment that was looking at neutron stars. And it was doing it for basic research, but they're pulsars. But the thing that I thought was neat was they were doing a software application trying to see if we could use that very continuous and periodic pulsation from the neutron stars and see if you could use it like a GPS system. Because that could be, when you go to another planet, you need to get someplace very precisely. How are we going to do it? We're going to put up a whole new set of GPS satellites around that planet. So until we do that, something like these pulsars could be our space navigation system, which I think is really kind of cool that they're looking at doing that. And they did a few tests, and it actually did work. Other things that we're doing that I think, from Star Trek days of, your replicator, we're doing 3D printing, manufacturing in space. We were testing different materials and different temperatures to make these tools, but in this case, we were making a socket, or a ratchet wrench, because in space you're losing stuff all the time, and you won't necessarily always have the capability to get a new one sent up, or you might need to repair a piece of hardware that wasn't planned that particular item would ever break. I mentioned the porch. We'd send experiments out on the porch and we'd launch them. These CubeSats, they're about this long and this wide, and everybody from school kids who had ham radios in them to one experiment was looking at a parachute system that could re-enter the Earth's atmosphere under that high heating. I was just like, wow, these are really cool experiments. And we launched over 40 satellites during our stay on board the space station. And then this was my last return in the Soyuz capsule. Landing is a little harsh. 1 meter before we touch down, we have soft landing engines that supposedly help slow us down. It's pretty much like a car crash. So now, if I could take questions, see what you're interested in hearing about.
When you spoke at Rice after, I guess it was the 2008 mission, you were asked if you would go back to space, and you said no because the training was so rigorous. and yet you went back, so I wondered why.
I'm surprised I said no. I wouldn't, I mean, you know, you always want to go back. And the training is long, and it is challenging. For each mission, we train 2 to 3 years, and it's all over the country, or actually all over the world. We train in Cologne, we train in Russia, we train in Japan, we train here, Canada. So it is long, but I got to go back.
You were showing some of the exercises and stuff you did. About how often or how much per day do you have to exercise to keep your...
2 hours a day, 1 hour of the resistive exercise and 1 hour of cardiovascular.
And did you have problems, like when you were a long time in space, when you came back and adjusting to gravity?
So everybody pretty much has problems at readjusting to gravity, but not because of strength. They measure our strength when we get back, and we're as strong as we were when we left because we do all this exercise on board the space station. But you still have to readjust to gravity. So there's neurovestibular effects that make you feel nauseous or dizzy. There's all the little balance muscles that you need to stand up, you know, on one. They ask you to do that when you land, and that's just nearly impossible to do. Just because you've forgotten how to balance. And so we do all this rehab, 45 days of reconditioning, where they have us do all these weird little exercises like stand on a squishy mat and throw a weighted ball at the wall and catch it, and reteach the muscles in your knees and your ankles how to balance and you know, hold yourself again, because even though we lift all those weights, and you don't have to balance anything on orbit. So it's relearning some of that process takes up to 45 days. The initial heaviness, I don't really want to be here, that lasts for, you know, 24, 48 hours, and you get over that relatively quickly.
So did you address being ill on the space station?
We have crew medical officers. We're all trained as crew medical officers, so we do EMT type training in case somebody got hurt. We do quarantine people before they come up to try and minimize any risk of sending something up that would make everybody ill. Occasionally, it's happened, I think maybe twice, where, you know, somebody was sent up who had been infected with a cold but hadn't shown any symptoms at the time, and then everybody got a cold. But that's very rare. You know, in the 9.5 months I was up there, nobody got sick.
So no, like, what's the plan for an emergency? Somebody with appendicitis?
Okay, so if somebody had an appendicitis, we would probably be coming home early. We'd bring that Soyuz crew home early to deal with that. For myocardial infarction, we train to do CPR, and we would try and resuscitate the crew, you know, if we could do that. So,
Great,
here.
thank you.
You were speaking about a visual impairment. What was that like, and did you experience any of that?
I did. Mine happened to be completely reversible. My distance vision actually got a little better in flight. My close vision got really a lot worse this time. So I ended up wearing glasses most of the time this time, which before I had contact lenses, but I didn't have, you know, I got that little old age thing where I needed to wear glasses, and so it was a little bit more challenging this time with the vision changes. Some vision changes are permanent. They have people who have choroidal folds. The spotting, I can't remember the name of it. We've had a case or two of that as well. So we're trying to better understand what's causing that. We think potentially that fluid shift, and we thought intracranial pressure. And now the more studies that we're doing, it's not actually intracranial pressure. But the fluid shift may still be involved. The redistribution of fluids may be a factor.
Say we're going to put a large-scale colony out there somewhere to an Earth orbit.
Large-scale colony, and I can only do one. Well, you're confining me too much. Because I think we need to do some testing on the moon before we, take the leap to go on a 9-month mission to Mars. At least with the conventional engines we have now, we could maybe do it in 3 months if we could fly nuclear reactors to provide more energy for us, as opposed to fuel engines. So there's lots of options out there, but I really want to see us get to Mars. But I think the best steps to do that are going to be, as we have planned, a gateway station past the moon that would then serve as a way to go down and explore and test things on the moon. And then it would, in the future, then serve as maybe a fuel depot or stopping point before you head off to Mars. So that's my answer is I want 3. Sorry.
If you were not exercising in space, would you feel aches and pains anywhere in your body being zero gravity?
No. No, I have the best sleep ever in space because there's no aches and pains.
So for all the scientific researches you do you focus on any factor other than gravity?
Yeah, there's lots of different things. We're looking at air-gas mixing. But gravity's still a variable in everything that we do up there because we don't have it, or you have it down here and up there we don't have it. So it's always a variable, but it allows us to do some really interesting things. Floating drops of fuel that then we ignite that you couldn't do here on the ground. There are just an incredible number of things that we can do because we don't have gravity there. But it makes a lot of other things more difficult because you have to figure out how to get fluids and gases to mix the same way or how you expect them to on the ground, or how you want them to in space.
How did you figure out that there's a vitamin D deficiency, or like the requirement is too low on Earth? Like, what were the tests that you did?
I actually don't know what the detailed tests were, but I think they were just looking at all the biochemical data and looking at the bone factors that your body puts out. It releases these factors when bone's demineralizing, and so they were looking at all that combination of things and determined that if we had higher vitamin D levels, we could prevent some of that. So I think we've got
Do you think
last
the
question.
balance exercise program would work for seniors that fall?
Yeah, I do think the balance exercise program would help people, train them, keep them in shape for as you got a little older. So, all right, great. It's great talking to you. Fantastic.